Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky prepares for his visit to France and Germany, while Washington warns Moscow troops are making headway in Avdiivka. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky announced on Thursday the creation of a, quote, new security architecture in his country. While it is unsure what that would entail, the declaration comes ahead of his visits to Germany and France on Friday. During his trip, the Ukrainian leader is expected to sign bilateral security agreements with Paris. Meanwhile, the White House warned that Moscow was beginning to overwhelm Ukrainian forces in Avdiivka.
I want to share a few words about the battlefield situation in Ukraine, where the fighting is incredibly intense in the east, particularly in a city called Avdiivka. It's a city that we've talked about several times before. Unfortunately, we're getting reports from the Ukrainians that the situation is critical, with the Russians continuing to press Ukrainian positions every single day. Avdiivka is at risk of falling into Russian control.
The Russian military has pressed attacks in several sectors in a bid to drain Kyiv's reserves and deplete its ammunitions. For months, the action has focused on Avdiivka. The city is seen as a gateway to the Russian-held regional capital of Donetsk.
The Greek parliament on Thursday approved the legislation of same-sex civil marriage. Polls show that the majority of Greeks were in favor of the bill drawn up by the center-right government and supported by 4 left-wing parties. The Greek Orthodox Church was against it.
Η σημερινή μέρα είναι μέρα χαράς, γιατί από αύριο ένας φραγμός ακόμα μεταξύ μας καταργείται για να γίνει γέφυρα συνύπαρξης σε μια ελεύθερη πολιτεία με ελεύθερους πολίτες.
The bill grants full parental rights on married same-sex partners with children. Yet it precludes gay couples from parenthood through surrogate mothers in Greece. The issue has divided Greeks. LGBTQI+ organizations have led the marches in support of the bill.
The American gridlock over Ukraine aid is already having consequences on the battlefield. That was the warning from NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg after a 2-day meeting of the alliance's defense ministers in Brussels. Stoltenberg hopes the US Congress will soon unblock a hard-fought bill that includes a $60 billion military and financial support for Kyiv. But Republican opposition in the House of Representatives remains stiff and is being influenced by presidential hopeful Donald Trump.
The Secretary General will brief you on the fact that the US has not been able to make a decision so far has already had consequences. It is impacting the flow of support. To some extent, this can be compensated by increased support from other allies. And the European allies and Canada are stepping up, are doing more.
Stoltenberg said assistance to Ukraine would be an example of transatlantic burden sharing, rather than the US working alone. The Secretary General also warned that Putin's victory in Ukraine could set a precedent for a Chinese invasion of Taiwan.
If President Putin wins in Ukraine, it's also a challenge for us. It will be a message to authoritarian leaders, not only Putin, but also to President Xi, that when they use military force, they get what they want. What happens in Ukraine today can happen in Taiwan tomorrow.
As part of the ongoing support for Ukraine, NATO defense ministers agreed to set up a new joint center in Poland. The hub will allow Ukraine's armed forces to share lessons learned from the war and train alongside their NATO counterparts.
EU Commissioner and former Lithuanian Minister Virginis Sinkevičius says the horrors of living under Soviet rule is still in living memory for Lithuanians. Euronews joined him in Ukraine recently, where he met with President Zelensky. Lithuania, the first of the 3 Baltics to declare independence from the Soviet Union in 1990, is one of the strongest per capita donors of military and financial aid to Ukraine.
It's first of all about our history, when hundreds and thousands, if you were a family of teachers, if you were a large farmer, most likely you were sent to Siberia, where most of the people never came never came back, they never returned. So, you know, and if you look, not so much changed. So many kidnapped children, so many families which had to go through some camps in Russia and etc. So I mean, this ethnic cleansing, what they're doing has not changed this imperial ambition which they're imposing now on Ukraine, and Lithuania still remembers, of course, the part of its tragic history.
Part of the wake-up call for Europe after Russia's full-ground invasion of Ukraine, he says, is how to avoid further complacency when it comes to security matters.
For the Western world, it's extremely important to make sure that we have a plan to support Ukraine, because now this decision-making, when it's so long, when we have to fight for every decision, that sends a very positive signal to Moscow, first of all, and very negative to Ukraine. I think the mistake is that there is still thinking that, you know, 1 month or the other month it can be over. We see that Russia is gambling exactly on that. They are waiting off. They are waiting for elections in US, elections in EU, and might be a completely different view. We already see some of the new governments in the EU who are not so supportive of Ukraine.
And what do you say to Viktor Orban?
I think it's shameful not to see obvious and, for example, decision to postpone decisions, not to have a vote on Sweden joining NATO. That's obvious, actions against the collective security, against the interests of the EU, against the interest of the Western world. And that's something that can only satisfy one side. It's the Moscow regime. Therefore, it's not a good timing to take for granted. It's time to actually increase our defense capabilities, defense industry, in order to not only provide for Ukraine, but also to provide for ourselves.
Some women in Ukraine are taking part of training sessions to prepare for combat in case their country ever needs them, as Kyiv enters its 3rd year of war against Russia. Ukrainian army is urgently looking for new recruits, while doubts grow about who should go into battle. So far, women have mostly been spared.
Життя непередбачуване на сьогоднішній день. Можливо, прийдеться, але я сподіваюся, що війна закінчиться швидше, ніж мені прийдеться туди вступати. Тому що мені хочеться робити трошки інші справи. Розвивати країну, працювати, ростити сина, щоб він виріс в квітучій країні, а не в країні, де йде війна.
Most of the women who take part in these training sessions have their husbands on the front line. Currently, only women with medical training are obliged to enlist.
The 74th edition of Berlin Film Festival Berlinale has kicked off. Film critics have been embracing the diversity of this year's film selection, which is lauded by many to be as contrasting as the international jury. This year's jury is presided over by none other than award-winning actress Lupita Nyong'o. 20 productions this year are in competition for the sought-after main prize, the Golden Bear. This is the last year for film festival directors Carlo Chatrian and Marietta Rissenbeek, who are stepping down after 5 years at the helm. La Cocina, Cuckoo and Small Things Like These are amongst the most anticipated films this year. Small Things Like These stars Cillian Murphy as the main character and was executively produced by Matt Damon. The jury is going to have a very exciting time this year, choosing which film is awarded the Golden Bear. The opening night already saw fans queuing for hours ahead of the world premiere of Irish drama Small Things Like These. The red carpet has already been the scene of 3 protests, including No to Racism and No to Far-Right Party, Alternative for Germany. It's fair to say this may be the most political edition of the Berlinale in decades.
Getting close to nature is the mantra of photographer and filmmaker Vincent Munier. He has traveled to the world's most remote regions, from the North and South Poles to Tibet, snapping shots of the wildest animals on the planet. His new exhibition at Lyon's Musée des Confluences is a dive into the forests he grew up with in eastern France.
J'ai appris en effet l'affût et je peux y passer des jours, des heures. Je suis totalement possédé par cette rencontre, par cette envie de mettre en avant les bêtes en quelque sorte qu'on a un peu mis de côté finalement. C'est ça qui m'affecte et qui m'attriste le plus. C'est à quel point on a avancé un peu en solitaire, quoi. C'est l'homme et les animaux un peu en spectacle ou en accessoire, mais pas au même rang. Il y a cette position un peu verticale qui m'agace énormément, quoi. Cette position hégémonique de notre espèce sur les autres.
The wild world is being gnawed away by man to the detriment of the flora and fauna. Vincent Munier wants to showcase the beauty of the planet, whether it comes from the other side of the world or close to home.
Ça fait longtemps quelques années que je voyage plus, et pourtant c'est mon métier de normalement. Mais pour essayer de montrer qu'on peut avoir une émotion aussi intense face à une panthère des neiges qu'un lynx, un chat sauvage ou même des fois une petite mésange. Il y a des choses qui paraissent tout à fait ordinaires et qui, quand on fait hyper attention, prend le temps et que tout est rassemblé, la lumière et tout, et ça devient extraordinaire.
The En Forêt exhibition is open to the public until 2025 at the Musée des Confluences in Lyon.